Welcome back for another fun project. Today's project is one that has been in my to-do pile for over a year. We're going to be sewing Simplicity 9106. I bought this pattern, it was in a haul a long time ago. When I made my edgestitch jeans, I bought a lot of denim, and this was one of the denims I bought for the jeans. But when it got here, two things. It was not a stretch, and it was super lightweight. It's a very, very, very lightweight, which you could make pants out of it, but it's better for a top. So this is going to be today's fabric, but I'm gonna do it with a little twist. I'm doing this view right here with the collar, and it has sort of a deep hem. It has a 2 1/4 inch hem in the sleeve. So I'm going to line my hem facings behind my buttonholes and the underneath of the collar in this gingham check. And I got cute buttons. You probably saw these in a haul too. They look like the leather button, but they're in red. So I got that. And now the one thing I haven't decided, and I wanted to originally top stitch it all in red, but then I went and kind of looked at things already top stitched in red, and I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. So I haven't decided. I may go ahead and top stitch everything in navy, in the blue that matches. Also, I have to decide, do I want to do a flat felled seam? Do I want to do a mock flat felled seam? And so those are things I'll decide as I get into it, because there's some alterations and I'm gonna have to baste it together and do a little fitting before anything happens. All right, let me show you the pattern changes that I made and the things we need to do if we want to face that hem instead of do a regular hem in the sleeve, and get to sewing. Oh, don't forget to pre-treat all your fabrics. These are cottons, and there's a definite possibility for shrinkage, so you can see mine have the serging on the edges. They've been machine washed and dried, just like they will be treated once they're a garment, to make sure if there's any fabric loss, I've taken care of it before cutting. Okay, I'm sorting out what needs to be cut out of my contrast fabric, and it's pretty easy. We have two facing pieces, a left and a right front facing. So those I'm going to be cutting out of an interfacing and out of my contrast. And then I need to cut one of the two collar pieces out of an interfacing and the contrast. And then I've made my little facing for the hem of the sleeve, and that also will be cut out of the contrast. But it is a slightly bell-shaped sleeve. At least in the picture it looks that way, but when you look at the actual pattern piece, it just looks like a straight sleeve. Let me show you how I cut it out. So for alterations, I'm actually just bringing out, because this is a multi-size pattern, I can draw across the lines to the fullest size. It's easier to take it out than to put it back later, so I'm going to cut it wide in the hip because I always need extra, especially in the back. So I'm just using their multi-size pattern to my advantage, and I'm starting right below the notch, and I'm just gradually drawing out. And this is about 4 inches above the hem, so I'm at my fullest size by then, and then I can lay the next pattern piece that matches up to it, line them up on the notches. So I have my side seam lined up with my notch here, and I've transferred the line, but something I noticed for both of the fronts is they're a little bit shorter than the back by about 1/4 inch. It doesn't say there is ease in this side seam, so I don't know if that's just a mistake or if there's ease, but there is 1/4 inch difference when you match it up perfectly at the notch, and that's true for both sides, for the right and left side to the back. So you can see just a slight difference right there. Just a heads up, so you can either choose to ease it in or maybe cut it longer or shorter if you don't want to have that a little bit of ease at the side seam. Once I've transferred that to both of my side seams, here's the other one, then I'm ready to trim down the side seam for my pattern, and we're ready to start cutting out. I have one more pattern change that I'm making on the sleeve. I am going to line the hem with my contrast, so I made a little pattern piece for that. So this is the hem depth. It's 2 1/4. So I've made my little pattern piece for the hem depth, and then when I cut the sleeve itself, I'm not going to cut all of this out. I'm going to just leave myself 1/4 inch seam allowance here on the stitch. I'll turn it up so you can see what I mean, and then I'll sew those to each other, and this will become my new hem inside the sleeve. It'll have a little cute contrast hem. All right, so I've turned up 2 inches of the 2 1/4 inch hem, so that gives me a 1/4 inch seam allowance down here at the bottom to match with the 1/4 inch seam allowance that I added to this, so that when I sew them together, this will become the new lining inside that hem, which will be so cute. I only need 1 of each facing, so I have them lined up on a single layer, and you can see I can see right through to get my grain line on target. So I've got 2 facings pinned down. I'm going to cut those out, and then I'll fold it to get my 2 sleeve facings and my single collar on the fold. Okay, here's my collar. My under collar is what it's going to be, my collar lining, and here's my 2 sleeve facings. You can see I've just folded what was above where I cut out the front facings. So I have all this left, which is going to be great pocket linings and lots of other accent pieces for another project. Okay, we're cutting out 2 backs. The back is not on the center fold, and 2 sleeves. Then I will open it up and we'll cut a single left front and right front, and I have to find a little place to cut 1 collar that's also on the fold. I've got lots of extra fabric. I definitely think I'm going to be able to get a pair of summery shorts out of the scrap of this too. Because we have a single front for right and left, and they're very different, you want to make sure you do not flip your pattern pieces. Sometimes we'll turn our pattern piece over where we see the wrong side to make it fit. Don't flip your pattern pieces. It won't work. This is one where you have to leave the pattern pieces right side up to get it to work. So you can see I've got my left front. I've just measured to make sure my grain line is right, so you can see it's a squirrely pattern piece. And I'm getting ready to move my fabric over and do the same for this one. And then I'll just have to cut my collar. So are all cut out, and the first thing we're going to do is apply our interfacing to everything. Now, if you chose to do a contrast under your collar like I doing, or in your facing, you're going to apply the interfacing to the main fabric color for your collar. Okay, so here's my interfacing on that, and then we're going to apply it to the facing piece for the center fronts, for the left and right fronts. So I'm going to just fuse that on really quickly, and then we're going to go on to dart and center back seam. If you look at your directions, every pattern company does their directions differently. And on this one, if we look, step 1, some of them will have every single thing broken down. So they'll stay stitch, then they'll do a dart, then they'll, this one does not. This one is sort of sticking it all together. So number 1, they have you stay stitch your neckline edges. Depending on your fabric, that can be very important because it keeps that curvy, biasy little seam from stretching out because we're applying collar there. So they have you stay stitch your neckline. Stay stitching is just stitching at the 5/8 inch line, usually a basting with no back stitching, so you can pull it out later, and it just gives it stability and protects that curvy seam. So that's step 1. And then they also have you do darts in that same thing. Make sure if you stay stitch, don't forget to turn your stitch back to a smaller stitch when going to do darts. If you've never done a dart, I'll put a link up above for you so that you can find my little dart video. So I'm going to press and sew in my darts and sew my center back seam because I need to try this on. So after I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and put it together at the side seams and just see how the fit is in the hip, so I know if I need to do any changes before I go on to collar. So it really has us doing, step 1 and 2 is prepping everything for doing collars. Okay, so we're gonna do all of that and then get into the collar. Center back seam is done. I'm going to go ahead and seam finish this at the overlock. I'm going to leave my full seam allowance on this, press it to one side and top stitch it. So I'll show you that in a minute. We're just going to get this to the point where I can do a quick fitting, but I will seam finish this before the fitting because denim frays a lot and I don't want to have a lot of fabric loss while I'm doing this. Now that that's done, I've got both of my darts pinned in and ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and do darts and then we'll do shoulder seams. So this part goes really fast. All right, I'm going to, before I press this in good, and I loved a good pressed dart, but I'm not going to until I do my fast fitting. So I'm going to now baste it together at the shoulders and the side seams, just so I can do a quick fitting, and then I'll come back and we'll do this in order. So I'm gonna serge my back seam. All right, let's baste this together and try it on. Here's how the neckline stay stitching looks. Just a 5/8 inch basted line. I waited to do it until after I had sewn my center back seam. I'm gonna do it on the front necklines also, and then we will baste it together for fitting. Okay, can you see me? I extended the hip line because I knew it was going to be tight. I knew it was pretty fitted for my fuller hip. And it is. It fits fine on top. I'm going to try not to hit my mic. So up here, this overlaps. It's fine. It's plenty big enough. Up here, and this is this. I'm using the plus size, the smallest in the plus size pattern up top. Fits fine. Dart lines up fine. All that's good. But can you see just right down here? It doesn't quite meet. It's just a little snug. So what I'm going to do is let out the seam as far as it will go on all of the side seams in the center back. Right down here at the very bottom. It's fine through the waist. It's just from waist down. Typical for me. So I'm going to do that. Now I know for fit and I can continue on. I got warm. We were below freezing when I woke up. We're close to 60 in a couple of hours. This is why Oklahoma has tornadoes. Our temperatures yo-yo so fast and those warm and cold fronts hit. It's a problem. And I know we actually have tornadoes in other parts of the state today because of this. It's hot now though. I was cold, now I'm not. Let's, now that I know what I need to do for all of that, let's look at our directions. Now that I've done my little fitting, I did stay stitch my necklines and I permanently sewed in my shoulder seams. So I'm going to go ahead and serge the edge of those shoulder seams because I know I want to do, I was going to do a true flat fell seam. I do have a video if you want to do flat felled seams on this, which is like the denim stitch or the denim seam you see a lot, and it's in my, I think it's in my notebook playlist, but I'll put a link to it. If you want to do a true flat felled, I'm going to do the mock flat felled, which just means it's a regular seam, press it to one side and then top stitch it. That's what I'm going to do for my shoulder seams, my side seams, and my center back seam, and probably my undersleeve, this underarm sleeve seam also just is going to look more attractive. I think I will just stitch it in the navy blue and not do it in red, which was my original thinking. Now that we've gotten to that point though, I'm going to go ahead and show you really quick how that stitch looks, and then we're going to start collar. So let me show you a mock flat felled seam on my shoulder seams. Make sure if you've been basting that you set your stitch length back. I just had to pull out a few stitches because I started this with a basting stitch. So I'm going to do this for all of my stitches. This is the center back, or for all of my seams. Here's my center back. I'm going to come back and do it on my shoulders, and then side seams, and on the sleeve also. So very easy to do a mock flat felled stitch or seam. Okay, we are ready to move down to collar. I am doing collar CD, so this is the view I'm doing. They are kind of done similarly in that the one that you've interfaced, there will be a notched edge, and we're going to fold up 3/8 of an inch. And the pattern actually says there's 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on that edge, so we're going to fold up that 3/8. I am facing mine with a contrast fabric, so it will not be quite as thick as if I had 2 layers of denim here. So I'm going to fold it up my 3/8 and press it. And then it says trim it down to 1/4. So if you're already folding up a scant 3/8 and trimming to 1/4, you're trimming off less than 1/8 of an inch. So I'm not going to worry about trimming it. I just not going to be that fussy because I also have this, which is a little lighter weight, so it's not going to get as thick and bulky as if I had 2 layers of denim. So I'm going to press that up for you real quick. Make sure you do it on the edge that has the notches. My notches are clipped in. Let me see if I can find here you go. See my little clips? So this is my notched edge. This is the edge that's going to get sewn to the neckline. The entire collar has 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. We're ready to sew. Now that we've pressed up, we're going to sew our 2 layers of collar together. One layer, which was the underneath collar, will be hanging down. This is what's going to get sewn to the shirt. This one's pressed up, which will be flipped over later. It'll make sense in a minute. I'm going to show you. It says to sew from the circle up. So if you look, that's really just the edge where we turned up. So we're going to just sew up, turn, and go all the way around to the other end, and we'll have a collar made. So we have put a collar together now. We're going to come in on these little corners. So here's our little corner. And we're going to trim that little corner out just so we have a nice sharp corner. So we're just taking off close to the stitches, but not all the way up on those 2 outer corners. And then it tells us to edge stitch. And to edge stitch, it makes it easy for you to see because I have 2 different fabrics. So this is the upper collar, or the collar that's going to show. This is the under collar. And to edge stitch, we're going to kind of press this open so that we can stitch seam allowance down towards the under collar. And we're going to just do a real close edge stitching on the under collar side. And that just keeps the under collar from rolling out. So, and then we'll press it around. You can't necessarily, or you can, but it's not easy. You can go all the way around, but really you just want this outer edge if possible. So we're going to press this it'll look like this at the sewing machine, and we'll be stitching on the under collar side close to our edge, but staying in the under collar. I'll give it a real quick press and I'll show you. Press the seam allowance to the under collar side, which is the gingham check side for me. Pin it into submission. I'm going to just open this up, slide it underneath so that I have the stitching on the under collar side. I'm getting up close to, but I don't have to go all the way to the corner, just get close. And you could, like I am, since I'm stitching in an opposing color now, this blue is going to be, my blue stitching is going to be in my red and white gingham, which is fine. So here's the setup for the edge stitch. Everything's pressed this direction, pressed towards the under collar, and we are going to stitch. You can see how close I am to the edge. Get my back stitch in there. And we're just going to stitch down the middle of the collar here. Get close to the corner, but not right up in it. Now that we've done that, we're going to turn our collar, and because I trimmed those little corners, you can see it turns nicely. Ready for another press. I love having this little contrast underneath. I think it's so cute. Okay, now we're ready to press this whole thing so that the upper collar looks like this and the under collar looks like that. If you want to, if you're going to top stitch, go ahead and top stitch your collar at this point. I'm doing the faux flat felled stitch, so because I'm doing a lot of top stitching, it would be perfectly appropriate for me to go ahead and top stitch this also, and I think I will. Because I'm top stitching it, I did not necessarily need to do this understitching, but I wanted to show you how the understitching works, so I'm not mad at it. I'm going to press this real quick. When pressing the upper collar and under collar, you want to make sure that you roll it so that you have no under collar peeking through. You'd rather have the upper collar roll slightly to the back, and I do mean ever so slightly, like this, rather than have it roll this direction. My pressed collar. One thing about top stitching is we still have to attach this collar, so I think I'm actually going to wait to top stitch this because I don't want to stitch down close to where the collar is going to attach to the neckline. So instead of top stitching now, we're going to go ahead and attach the collar. So we're going to take our top, and we have got notches, and we're going to match our notches up in the neckline, and it will be just the under collar only. It's getting stitched on right now, so we're going to match under collar notches up, and we're going to pin around to the marking on the front. There's a little marking where the collar needs to end. It's the center front, so you want to make sure you have transferred that marking. If you don't, your collar will either not meet where it needs to, or it will overlap. Both of those are not things we want. Usually it's a circle on the pattern. It'll be about 5/8 of an inch from the edge. It will be 5/8 of an inch from one edge and farther from the other, which I think is, yep, okay, good. Good, because we have an overlap. So your collar should not be, so on this side, my collar is about 5/8 of an inch from the edge, but on this side, it's going to be like 1.5 inches from the edge, which is how it should be, because we have the overlap. One side goes over the other for the button placket. And if they met exactly evenly when you overlap for the button placket, your collar would no longer meet at the center front. So make sure you transfer those little circle markings. That's going to help you keep your collar where it belongs. It has 3/8 of an inch in all of the neckline. Good to know. I did my stay stitching at 5/8 of an inch, so it's a little long, which is no big deal because it's basting. It can be pulled right back out. Okay, so now we're just going to stitch this on at 3/8 of an inch. Here's how the collar is going to look when you put it under the foot. So here's our seam where our upper and lower collar are sewn to each other. It's pinned on. I've got it marked. Here's my 3/8 of an inch. So you can see I'm lined right up with a 3/8. And we're just going to stitch carefully all the way around, trying not to get any bubbles. And we're going to stitch all the way down to the other end right here. So we now have the collar on, but not completely. But you can see how it's going to look. Isn't that cute? I love it. Okay, so I'm going to give that a press again, and then we are now, that was step 10. So it has us apply our front facings before we finish our collar, which makes sense to me. So I'm going to give this a quick press just to make sure that it's nice and smooth, and then we're ready to start our facings. Make sure you've kept your right and your left facings marked so you can tell which is which, because they are definitely different and they do different things on the garment. All right, so here is my left front. And I did not take my stitching all the way out, and I don't know why. I'm looking at this thinking, I basted this at the side seams and then I stopped right at the dart. Let me pull out these stitches because it's easier to sew. Then I'll come back in a bit and fix it, because I know I have to change my seam allowance in the hip line anyway, which is why we did the fitting. So here is my left front, and I'm going to find my left front facing. Now we need to do a seam finish on this. Make sure you've marked your notches. I'm just going to serge this edge. You could definitely do like they are in the directions. If you want to do like the directions, you're going to take this inside edge and you're just going to turn it under and top stitch it down. So you can do that. I'm going to just serge my inside edge real quick. Make sure I am serging the correct edge. This is where it's getting sewn, so this is my edge to serge. To sew these on, and the left one is longer because it's the one that goes underneath. So it has a little bit at the neckline too. So we're going to, if you look at your two pieces on after 11, after they say interface, which we've already done, and they tell you to turn under or somehow seam finish that outer edge, we're going to pin this on. So we're just going to sew our 5/8 all the way around. The facing has been interface, so it's stiffer than your outer garment. So you may have a little play. This often happens where the facing kind of feels like it shrunk, and what it really did was it became very stable because of the stabilizer, because of the interfacing. So you may have a little bit of ease, and I also showed you when I was cutting out that it actually was slightly different. So I'm looking at this, I have a lot of variation because I have a stretchy knit. There's also bias along this neckline. So we're going to have to do a little easing in, and then I'm going to put the facing on top and the shirt on the bottom, and that allows the sewing machine to do the easing for me. Lined up, this denim is staining my nails ever so slightly and messing with my nail polish. Okay, pinned together, putting the shirt side down. So when you get up here to the collar, we've been doing 5/8 of an inch, but then it's going to become 3/8 of an inch when we come across the top. So I am currently sewing up this outer edge. I don't know how well you can even see it in that camera, but we're going to be sewing up here 5/8. All right, so we've sewn up here to the 5/8. Gonna get rid of that. And now turns into 3/8. And you can see how if you were turning back your edge, you could definitely fold that back. I'm going to just let mine hang out there. So we'll top stitch it down in a little bit. But it should line right up with your collar. You just don't want to hit the collar, so I'm kind of watching it. And I could have flipped this over for this little section too. All right. That's only on the left side. The right side, you won't have to worry about that. Okay, so we have one facing with our collar. This is going to get flipped around to the other side. I'm going to trim out that little corner first, but if you've done it right, everything will line up perfectly right there and we will be happy. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other facing, and then we will come back and top stitch down. I'll show you how to do the rest of the facing edge that they have us doing. Once your facings are on, you need to come in and clip. The pattern actually has some circles marked on it, not on the facing piece, but on the left and right front pieces that tell you where they recommend you clip. But what you need to do is clip wherever you have a curve, whether it curves out or in. Clip up to, but not through your stitching. That's just going to make it press over nicer. And then if you've pressed this edge up instead of serging it, now is the time to stitch it down to keep it nice and smooth. So if you want to press that down and stitch it, so it will be turned under like this and stitched on your facing, you can do that. I'm going to go ahead and give everything a good press, and then up here in this corner where it was deep, I've trimmed out some of this corner so that when I flip it around, that corner will lay nice and flat. All of these little areas should line right up to our collars on both sides. See how they line right up with each other? So after that, we'll press and we will be ready to move on to, yeah, we're gonna finish our collar up. So they have us understitching your facing or stitching down your facing. The way they show it, it looks like they're stitching through the outer edge, but they're not. It's not top stitched. Top stitching is different than understitching. Top stitching goes through all the layers. This is only on the wrong side. So just like we did on the collar where we stitched right here, they have you do that on the facing. Press it this way. I am top stitching my facing, so I'm not going to worry about understitching, but you definitely can. So we're going to get all of that done, understitching, top stitching if you want. And now we're going to come and finish our collar. The next step shows finishing off the inside of our collar. So here's my facing, turn to the inside and pressed. You can kind of see how, you see just a tiny bit of the blue. And I'm going to do some top stitching, but I'm going to wait to top stitch until I get my collar finished. So you can come in and hand whip down this collar, this edge. This is stay stitching line here, so ignore the stay stitching line. We're going to be taking it out, but you can hand whip this down, or you can top stitch it if you're really careful. So I'm going to just top stitch that down. All right, this is how close to the edge I'm stitching. All right, here is how the collar top stitching is looking. I'm just doing it at 1/4 inch. This is how it looks on the wrong side. Here is where I did the edge stitching originally when I showed you the example, and I think I'm just going to take it out because I'm doing top stitching and I don't need it, and I just don't think it's as attractive. If I were not edge stitch, or if I were not top stitching, then I would leave it alone. Okay, I have the collar top stitched. I'm going to show you from the wrong side because you can just see it better. Hopefully you can see the stitching. So I have a top stitched collar. I'm now coming to side seam. So we're at step 15, which is side seam. We're sewing up our side seams and seam finishing. I'm going to serge that seam, press it to the back, and top stitch it just like I did the shoulder seams and the center back seam. So I'm going to do that for all my side seams. Then it's time for hem. So let's get our side seams done, and then I'll come back and work on hem, because how we're going to do the hem, I think I'm going to do hem and top stitch my front plackets all together. It'll be very pretty, and get that done, and then we're ready for sleeve, and we're very close to done. Time to press and top stitch. I am loving the little accent, peekaboo accent. I think that's so cute. I just top stitched my side seams. We're now going to come and finish our little facing hems. So if you look at step 16, we're going to fold back the facing and stitch it at 5/8 of an inch in preparation for hems. So here's how it looks. You can fold back these seam allowance and stitch them down. I'm just going to leave them out. I'm going to stitch up to both ways work. I just like to leave them free, because then if I decide I need to do some grading or trimming out, I have not pinned them down. Do this for both sides at 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to now come in with my scissors and trim this corner out so I can get a nice sharp corner. Because I back stitched down here, I'm going to come up and do a little stitching up here before trimming out that corner, just to make sure I don't have a hole open up with wear, even though I'm going to be doing some top stitching. It's just a good protection for that corner. And here's how that corner looks with the trimming away and with a little bit of reinforced cement. So now it's ready to be turned around. We can go ahead and do the other side, and then we'll start our hem. All right, we have finished up to this point. I am now going to just press up 5/8 of an inch all the way around. And once I've pressed that, I'm going to tuck back under for top stitching. And then I'm going to top stitch my hem. And once I've finished top stitching the hem, I'm going to kind of go from one end to the other. When I hit this corner, I'm going to come up and top stitch this outside edge too. So it'll all be nice and continuous. So here's how it looks pressed 5/8, and then I'm going to tuck this back under and pin it for stitching and give it another press for stitching, and then I'm ready to go on the hem. And I will stitch on the right side. That's my preferred method. You may feel more confident stitching on the wrong side. As long as you get everything lined up, you should be able to stitch on the right side. And with stitching on the right side, then I can easily see where I'm going to turn in this corner to come up. Oh my goodness, this is ruining my nails. Look at this. I'm just destroying my nails today. I'm going to come up and do this side too. And that is to do the center front, or the front edge top stitching. All right, I'm ready to do my hem. I've pinned it down, and I'm stitching on the right side, so I put my pins on the right side. This is the wrong side, but I'm starting all the way up here because I want to do this outer edge along the front also. So I'm stitching first. I'm just going to stitch along here and kind of do it continuously. I'm watching that I don't get too much movement. If I feel like I am, I can drop down my even feed foot. I'm stitching about 1/4 inch from the edge. I'm using my 1/4 inch foot to help me with that. So you can see that's how it looks, right and wrong. And I'm coming up here on the corner now, getting ready to transition into the hemline. Nice and pointy. Okay. And now I'm ready to transition into the hem. So here's how the top stitching looks. This is the hem, this is the front, and on the wrong side. And then up here on this side of the collar, this is the left side where we have the overlap. I went ahead and continued my 1/4 inch, and I just eased it back into and lined it up with the top stitching that I already did on the collar. So it looks like that. All right, we're ready to start on sleeve. So we have finished through 17. 18 is to sew some basting lines to ease in the cap. This is a set-in, so it's set-in sleeve, so you may have just a little bit of ease. So there's some basting lines, and then they have us sewing our underarm seam. But I chose to do a faced hem. So before I can do the underarm seam, I need to sew on the facing. So I'm going to go ahead and just sew this together at 1/4 inch down here and press it. So this will be then the right length of the sleeve. And I'm going to go ahead and do my basting lines up here in the cap, just so I have a little bit for easing. I think it's going to be very easy to put in the sleeve, but I'll go ahead and do some basting lines just to have them. And I'm going to also go ahead and sew my underarm seam, serge it, and then I am going to top stitch it just like I have done everything else. So I'll show you when I'm ready. I'll show you that. Here's how it looks with the facing applied. I didn't serge it because it's going to be self-faced, so I'm not even going to worry about that. And I'm going to go ahead and edge stitch on the right side because I'm top stitching. I'm actually going to top stitch the deep hem on the other side too. So I'm going to go ahead and do this edge stitching now before I sew the underarm seam. All right, and so that's how it's really just a close top stitch. That's how it looks on the right side. This is how it looks on the wrong side. Now remember, this is going to get turned up for the hem, so you won't be seeing this except the little peaks of it once in a while. So that's going to be hem later. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to do my basting in the cap, and we will go ahead and do our underarm seam. So here is the sleeve prepped for top stitching, and I'm going to show you how I top stitch it. And I went ahead and turned under 1/4 inch so that when this is ready to be turned up and stitched, it's ready to go. When top stitching, it looks like this. You want to start at the sleeve cap because it's the widest, and you're really working in a little circle here and just working towards the edge. I'm only going to top stitch as far as here. I'm not worried about coming down into this because this is on the inside, and it gets harder and harder the closer you get to the edge because you're sewing in a little tunnel here. You've got a tube you're sewing in. Now that I have top stitched the underarm seam, I'm ready to do the hem. I've already done this narrow stitching on only one side. I sort of did like a reversed or outside edge stitching, and now I'm doing a deep hem because this is almost a 2-inch hem now. So let me go from this side so you can see how deep it is. Took my free arm, made it a free arm, took my tabletop off, and I am now putting in the sleeve hem, and then we'll be ready to put the sleeves in. Right before buttonholes and buttons, I've decided that I want to top stitch in my sleeve. So here's the sleeve, and I've serged around it and taken off a little bit of the seam allowance, and then I'm pressing the seam allowance into the sleeve itself and just stitching all the way around. So I've got top stitching. Here's my shoulder seam, and here's my sleeve. I managed to sew with the dead mic once again. So this is a little voiceover of me explaining how to use the buttonhole template for getting you set up for the buttonholes. Sometimes I don't use the template, I just measure it out. It's just as easy, but in this case, because of the curvy front, the template's very important. I also did a sample buttonhole first on a scrap of fabric. My buttonholer measures and remembers. So once I get a buttonhole the way I like it, it will do it again and again and again for me. So that's why I always do a sample first, and then I can just line them up and go. When making buttonholes, you want to have the buttonhole start or line up on the center front. So the buttonhole template is great for that because they've taken away the seam allowances for you and got it all lined up. So definitely use their template. If you're doing your buttonholes vertically, then they need to be right on the center front. If you're doing them horizontally, then you need to start it on the center front and go into the garment or away from the center front, and it'll line up better. When deciding how big your buttonhole should be, it should be the width of the button plus the depth of the button. If you don't do that, it won't fit and it won't line up correctly. You can also end up having your button hanging off the center front where it just is too it's too large and it doesn't line up properly. Anyway, that's all of the explaining that I'm trying to do here for you. I'm probably more concise because I'm recording this a second time. On to buttonholes. Okay, first thoughts are very cute and fun, and I really like the pattern. I'm going to just turn so you can see this back here. This is a problem for a curvy girl, and it depends on how your curves are. But for me, I'm small in the waist and full in the hip, and this tends to happen. And the only way to get rid of it is to put darts in the back. So I have a feeling I'm going to be darting this back here just so I don't have this. Kind of creates a shelf with a roll on top, and the only way to fix that is darts. So the front though, because it has the bust line dart, the front, look at how smooth and pretty the front looks. Fits great. It has a 3/4 sleeve, which I've said many times I really like. Because I lined that sleeve, it would be cute. I could easily roll the sleeve up. I have it open at the neckline right now, but it could be buttoned all the way up. And it looks really cute. I kind of like it open, a little open. I love the length. Look at how long that is in the back. I did not lengthen it at all. So it's a nice long tunic-y length, which is very attractive. Step forward so you can kind of see the neckline and the collar. I just love the little hints of other fabric. I just think that elevates it a little bit. I'm not loving the button. I don't hate the buttons, but they kind of look like little basketballs now that they're all on there. So I'll have to live with it for a little bit and see what I think. Also pleased with all the top stitching and the treating it like a sort of an upscale denim shirt, sort of a little more high fashion, but still a denim shirt. See you next week for another fun video.